China in revolution. The people rise up against Xi Jinping. The streets are alive with a palpable sense of unrest as protesters all across China rise up against the iron grip of the CCP's authoritarian regime. With every passing hour, their numbers swell, and the government grows increasingly concerned about losing control of the situation. Tensions reached a boiling point in Xiang Xiao, where clashes between protesters and authorities erupted into violent chaos just a few days ago. And now, as the weekend comes to a close, the unrest has spread like wildfire to 13 Chinese cities and around 80 universities, making it the most widespread and serious moment in China's history since the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. The CCP is feeling the heat like never before, and they are pulling out all the stops to suppress any news of the protests. Censors are working overtime to block social media posts. Signal jammers are tracking protest movements, and even popular websites like Weibo and WeChat have gone dark to stem the flow of information. But despite the government's efforts to silence them, the people's voices are growing louder by the hour. It remains to be seen how this standoff will play out. But one thing is clear, the future of China hangs in the balance. The winds of change are blowing strong in China, as for the first time ever, citizens are openly opposing the government and their authoritarian rule under President Xi Jinping. It's a rare sight to behold, as people are putting their personal safety at risk to voice their opinions against the powers that be. So what caused this sudden surge of fury among the masses? It all started with a tragic fire in a faraway apartment building in Wuhan, where 10 people lost their lives due to the CCP's mismanagement. This was the last straw for the people who had grown tired of the government's constant lockdowns, mandatory PCR tests, and zero COVID policies. To achieve the utopian goal of zero COVID, the CCP had implemented strict measures including electronic magnetic alarms on the front doors of some people and fences to keep people in. It was a policy of zero tolerance that left people feeling trapped and oppressed. But the people had had enough. And what started as a small spark of dissent in March quickly turned into a raging wildfire of protests across the country. The CCP is now facing its most serious threat to its existence, as the people demand change and accountability. Will the government heed their calls, or will they double down on their oppressive tactics? Only time will tell, but one thing is for sure. The people of China are no longer willing to be silenced and are fighting back for their freedom. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought the world to its knees, but no country has been more affected than China. While the rest of the world has moved on from the initial shock of the pandemic, President Xi Jinping and his government have been dealing with COVID-19 as if it were still 2019. The CCP's zero-tolerance policy toward COVID-19 has resulted in excessive mass testing, the lockdown of millions of people, and the shutting down of thousands of businesses. The government's forceful tactics have left people's daily lives crippled and their voices silenced. But now, these very same policies are coming back to haunt the CCP. The people have had enough of being locked down and forced quarantined. They are hungry, desperate, and angry. In one of the world's richest cities, residents are ransacking grocery stores, screaming for food. The world's third largest city remains in lockdown, with 25 million residences ordered confined to their homes. People are using bicycle locks and padlocks to keep themselves in, while apartment buildings are being locked from the outside, trapping people like prisoners. Even infants and toddlers are not spared from the CCP's harsh tactics. Parents are being separated from their children, who are being forcefully quarantined in jail cell-like facilities. The CCP's once impenetrable grip on its people is slowly slipping away. The people are rising up and demanding change and accountability. It remains to be seen how the government will respond, but one thing is for sure, the people of China are no longer willing to suffer in silence. It is a story that's straight out of a dystopian sci-fi movie. People are screaming that they're starving, and apartment buildings are being locked from the outside, all in the name of achieving a zero-COVID target set by President Xi Jinping. But as time goes on, it becomes clear that these extreme measures aren't working. Citizens are getting fed up with sacrificing their lives for a goal that seems unattainable, and a movement starts brewing. Social media posts circulate about how lockdowns just don't work, and people want their lives back. Tragically, stories of people dying because of these lockdown measures start to pick up steam, including the heart-wrenching tale of a 3-year-old boy who died because a coveted worker wouldn't let him leave an apartment complex to seek treatment. It's enough to cause a massive uproar on Chinese social media, leading to protests at Apple's Foxconn facility, where workers were forced to live and sleep in the factories without any outside contact. The protests escalated to a point where the CCP had to take drastic action. They brought in their military forces to handle the situation, which only added fuel to the already raging fire. Videos circulated on social media showing tanks rolling through the streets, tear gas being deployed, and protesters being beaten and arrested. The world watched in horror as China once again showed its authoritarian side. As the dust settled, it became clear that this was not just a one-off incident, but a deep-seated problem with the CCP's handling of the pandemic. The people of China were fed up with being locked down, quarantined, and silenced. They were tired of sacrificing their freedoms for the supposed greater good. Now, as the world slowly recovers from the pandemic, China is still struggling to get back on its feet. The once thriving economy has taken a hit, and the CCP's grip on power seems to be slipping. The events of the past year have shown that even the most powerful governments are not immune to the will of the people. And for China, that could mean a very uncertain future. It sounds like a scene straight out of a horror movie, but unfortunately, it's a real-life event that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. The building was like a prison, and the residences were trapped in a living nightmare for over 3 months. As if that wasn't enough, when the fire broke out, they couldn't escape because the doors were probably locked from the outside, leaving them helpless in the face of a raging inferno. The fire department tried their best to save them, but due to the barricade compound, they were unable to reach the building for 3 agonizing hours. It's a heart-wrenching sight to watch the footage of the fire department desperately trying to put out the fire, but the distance was too great and the water couldn't reach the building. It's a tragedy that underscores the dangers of an extreme lockdown and the importance of balancing public health with individual freedoms. A raging inferno that swept through the building under zero-COVID lockdown has left a tragic toll in its wake. 10 people, including 3 children, lost their lives, while 9 others were left hospitalized. But it was the response from officials that set the nation alight, blaming the victims for not being strong enough to save themselves. Meanwhile, protesters took to the streets, slamming the CCP's strict COVID policies as the root cause of the tragedy. The spark for these demonstrations first ignited in the city of Urumqi in Xinjiang, where crowds gathered to chant, "End the lockdown and release us." This level of unrest is uncommon in the region, where security clampdown has seen more than 1 million mostly Muslim peoples forced into re-education programs. Yet the protests quickly spread to Shanghai, where hundreds of residents gathered for a candlelight vigil and chanted for human rights, freedom, and democracy. This rare and fervent display of dissent in China has sent shockwaves through the nation and beyond. As the protests continue to spread throughout China, the world watches with bated breath to see how the CCP will respond. Will they listen to the people's demands for freedom and human rights, or will they continue to suppress dissent and maintain their authoritarian grip on power? One thing is for sure, the events of the past few days have shaken China to its core, and it remains to be seen what the future holds for this complex and rapidly changing nation. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it informative, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates on this developing story.